Christ. Yet I live, but not I. Christ lives in me. And the life I live, I now live by faith of Jesus Christ, who lives in me. And he lives in me as his life, so that my flesh has been crucified and my will has been crucified. The mud man no longer gets any authority in this thing. The body of flesh that we are so used to running things, which is a body of sin. All right, so with that in mind, it says in verse 12, therefore, and it's because of these things that I just mentioned, just as through one man, being Adam, sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. When death and sin entered through Adam, we all became in bondage to the power of sin and death. We're in bondage. We could not release ourselves from that bondage. And it says, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed or ascribed to someone when there is no law. We talked a little bit about this in the previous section here, that before the law, Abram believed. And there was no law at the time, so his faith was counted as righteous because there was no law to say you acted according to the law, he acted according to faith. So until the law, sin was in the world, but it wasn't counted because there's no law to call it sin. Nothing said thou shalt not murder, so if you murdered, it wasn't against the law of God, but it was still sin. That makes sense? I mean, just because you don't call it against the law doesn't mean it isn't. Life is sacred and holy, in other words. And murder would be murder even if you didn't call it against the law. But when God said, thou shalt not murder, it became against his law. And therefore, when we did, it was considered sin under the law. And the law could not set us free once we violated the law. But Abram believed in God, which we talked about in the 4th chapter. And God saw that he was faithful apart from the law, before the law was given. And because he trusted God, God considered that trust and belief in what God said about his son being born to him and having seed, as many as the stars in the sky and sand on the seashore, that was credited to him as righteousness. There was no sacrificial death of Jesus. There was no sacrifice at the time. There was just one man believing what God said, and because he did and acted on it,